The gas station attendant paid for the gasoline of an elderly lady with a humble appearance and was fired by the manager a few hours later. He couldn't believe who knocked on his door. Jake worked at a gas station and was going through an exceptionally busy day. The sun was scorching, and many customers were arriving to refuel their vehicles. He attended to everyone efficiently and with a smile, even when the heat became unbearable. Amid the rush, Jake noticed an elderly woman with simple, worn clothes approaching with a worried expression on her face. The heat of the day was relentless, pushing Jake to keep up the pace. He moved quickly between cars, offering a smile and fast service to each customer. The lines didn't seem to shorten, and exhaustion was beginning to set in, but Jake didn't let his fatigue show. As he finished assisting an impatient driver, he noticed the elderly woman approaching. Her simple and worn clothes contrasted with the modern, shiny vehicles around her. The expression on her face was one of concern, as if carrying an invisible weight that made her hesitate with each step. Jake looked around to see if any of his colleagues could cover for him momentarily. When no one was available, he decided to take a brief pause to see what the lady needed. He approached her, trying to maintain the warm smile he offered to all customers. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you with something?" asked Jake, trying to hide the fatigue in his voice. The elderly lady looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. Finally, she took a deep breath and tried to speak, but the words seemed to escape her. Jake remained patient, waiting for her to find the courage to express what she was feeling. Around them, the noise of cars and people continued, but in that moment it felt like there was a bubble of silence between them. "My name is Mrs. Eleanor," she finally said in a low and hesitant voice. I filled my car, but I accidentally left my wallet at home." Jake noticed the sincerity in her voice, and the genuine worry on her face touched him deeply. He knew situations like this could happen to anyone, and he felt an immediate urge to help. "I understand, Mrs. Eleanor," he replied, in a reassuring tone. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out." Without hesitation, Jake opened his own wallet and calmly handed her the money needed for the fuel. With a gentle smile, he said, "You don't have to worry, Mrs. Eleanor. Pay me later, I trust your word." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She looked relieved but still a little unsettled by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I promise I'll repay every cent." Jake nodded, still smiling. "Don't worry about it now. What matters is that you're okay." The elderly woman held Jake's hand for a moment, expressing her gratitude without needing words. He felt a deep human connection in that gesture, a mutual understanding that went beyond the immediate situation. Deeply moved by Jake's generosity, Mrs. Eleanor began to cry. The tears in her eyes reflected sincere relief and gratitude that she struggled to fully express. "You don't know how much this means to me," she said, her voice trembling. She rummaged through her worn-out purse once more and found a piece of paper. With trembling hands, she wrote down her name and address, folded the paper carefully, and handed it to Jake. "So you know where to find me," she said, offering the paper as a guarantee. "You can trust me." Jake took the paper with a smile, carefully placing it in his uniform pocket. "I believe you, Mrs. Eleanor. Don't worry." Meanwhile, other gas station employees were observing the scene from afar, exchanging skeptical glances. They had seen many difficult situations and were used to dealing with problematic customers, so the idea of helping someone in this way seemed unusual to them. "Jake, you're too nice," said Paul, a colleague, shaking his head. "You've got to be careful. Not everyone is as honest as they seem." Jake shrugged, still smiling. "I prefer to believe in people until they prove otherwise," he replied calmly. "I think everyone deserves a chance." Another employee, Mark, couldn't hold back a sarcastic smile and added, "That old lady is probably a first-class liar. There are always con artists around here." Jake heard the offensive comments and felt a pang in his chest. He knew that distrust and cynicism were common in that environment, but he couldn't accept that they would treat Mrs. Eleanor like that. Instead of joining the criticism, he approached her again as she prepared to leave, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes still filled with gratitude and a hint of sadness from what she had overheard. Jake looked at her with determination in his voice. "You don't need to worry about what they're saying," he said, loudly enough for his colleagues to hear. "I believe in you. Their words mean nothing." The employees who had made the rude comments fell silent, their expressions shifting from surprise to mild embarrassment. Jake's attitude, filled with conviction and kindness, made it clear that he would not tolerate the disrespect toward the elderly lady. Mrs. Eleanor, still with tears in her eyes, squeezed Jake's hand in a silent gesture of gratitude. "Thank you again, son. Your kindness means so much to me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Jake smiled, feeling a wave of warmth that surpassed the heat of the day. "It's nothing, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm here to help." She nodded and held his hand for a moment longer before letting go and getting into her car. Mrs. Eleanor thanked him one last time, wiping away the tears that still ran down her face. She started the engine, waved to Jake, and drove away. Jake waved back, feeling a quiet satisfaction from having done what he believed was right. As the car disappeared from view, Jake returned to work, but with a sense of inner fulfillment. Helping that lady, even in such a small way, had given him a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that, despite the rush, that gesture had made a difference in someone's day, and that meant more to him than any physical effort the job required. The other employees also returned to work. Some still cast doubtful looks, but no one made any more sarcastic comments. Jake knew that his words and actions had left a strong impression, at least for a moment. He hoped that perhaps this might make his colleagues reconsider their attitudes in the future. The sun continued to shine intensely, but Jake felt lighter, as if that act of kindness had illuminated his day in a special way. He returned to his duties, aware of the skeptical looks from his colleagues, but determined to maintain his belief in people's goodness, knowing that small gestures of generosity can make a big difference in the world. While serving the next customers, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Eleanor and the piece of paper in his pocket. He had faith that she would return, but more than that, he believed that, regardless of the outcome, it wasn't about the money. A few minutes after the elderly lady left, the hostility from Jake's colleagues resurfaced. Murmured comments and judgmental glances followed him as he attended to the remaining customers. Jake tried to ignore them, keeping his focus on his work. As the day finally began to wind down and the customer flow slowed, Jake thought he might be able to relax a little. However, his thoughts were interrupted when the station manager, Mr. Thompson, called him to the office. The manager looked serious, with a worried expression Jake rarely saw. "Jake, I need to talk to you," Mr. Thompson said, indicating a chair on the other side of the desk. Jake sat down, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He knew something was wrong. "I heard about what happened today," the manager began, choosing his words carefully. "One of the employees informed me that they saw you taking money from the register to pay for a customer's fuel." Jake felt a shock of indignation mixed with sadness. He immediately shook his head, denying the accusation. "No, sir, I didn't do that," he responded firmly. "I used my own money to help that lady. She was in a difficult situation and seemed genuinely worried. I couldn't leave her without help." Mr. Thompson observed Jake closely, assessing his sincerity. "So you're telling me you took money from your own pocket to pay for her fuel?" "Yes," Jake affirmed, his eyes reflecting the seriousness of his words. "I believe in her word, and I was willing to risk my own money to help. I felt it was the right thing to do." The manager remained silent for a moment, thoughtful. He had known Jake for some time and was aware that he was an honest and dedicated employee. Still, he needed to consider all the information before making a decision. "Jake, your attitude was very noble," Mr. Thompson finally said, softening his expression a little. "But you need to understand that any movement of money, whether from the register or personal, can be misinterpreted." Jake nodded, understanding the manager's concern. "Yes, sir. I understand. It was an impulse to help someone in need. I didn't think about the possible consequences." The manager listened carefully, perceiving the sincerity in Jake's voice. However, his expression remained serious and unyielding. He sighed deeply before speaking again. "I'm sorry, Jake, but it's too late," Mr. Thompson said, his voice firm. though without the harshness that usually accompanied a dismissal. If we make an exception, others might think they can delay payments, and that could create problems. I understand your good intentions, but we need to follow the rules. Jake's heart sank. He knew he had acted from the heart, but he never expected it to result in such a drastic measure. The lack of empathy and understanding in the manager's tone was evident. Despite all his effort and dedication to his work, he was being punished for trying to do good. Mr. Thompson, please understand. Jake tried to argue, but the manager raised his hand to stop him. I understand, Jake, but I can't let this go, the manager continued. The decision has already been made. Unfortunately, I'll need you to hand in your badge and keys. Jake's heart dropped. He knew his actions could be misinterpreted, but he never imagined it would result in his dismissal. With a sigh, Jake took his badge out of his pocket and placed it on the manager's desk, along with the station keys. I hope you find a place where your good intentions are recognized and valued, Mr. Thompson said, his voice softening a little. But here we have to follow the rules strictly. Jake stood up, feeling a heavy weight on his shoulders. He nodded to the manager in thanks and left the office. Now the gas station seemed different, much colder and more impersonal. His colleagues cast curious looks at him, and some even seemed pleased with what had happened. He slowly walked to his locker, grabbed his few belongings, and walked out the front door. The sun was still shining intensely, but the heat of the day seemed to have lessened, reflecting his mood. Jake left the station with his eyes filled with tears and his heart heavy from the loss of his job. He knew he had done what he believed was right by helping Mrs. Eleanor, and despite his dismissal, he did not regret his decision. His actions aligned with his principles, and that gave him a sense of integrity, even if the company didn't recognize it. As he walked home, Jake reflected on what had happened. He knew he had acted from the heart, but he also understood the need for rules and regulations. Even so, the lack of compassion from the manager left him bitter. Despite the sadness, Jake decided that he wouldn't let this episode change who he was. He would continue to believe in kindness and help others whenever he could. After all, Jake preferred a world where acts of generosity were the norm, not the exception. With this thought in mind, he moved forward, determined to find a place where his actions would be valued and where he could continue making a difference in people's lives, even in small but meaningful ways. When he arrived home, Jake found his mother, Aurora, in the living room, immersed in her daily activities. Her presence, always a refuge of care and understanding, seemed like a relief amid the whirlwind of emotions he was feeling. The image of his mother, calm and comfortable at home, strongly contrasted with the inner turmoil he carried. Jake knew that she would sense his sadness and that he would need to be strong to face the moment. But the thought of sharing his pain with someone who truly cared for him made it a little easier to breathe. He approached the living room, where the familiar environment offered a small consolation in the middle of his disillusionment. The peaceful scene at home, with the aroma of fresh coffee and the soft sound of the radio in the background, provided a calming contrast to the agitation of his day. As Jake entered the room, the weight of tears and sadness was still present. But just being home, near his mother, brought a sense of relief and temporary lightness. He knew that, despite the challenges, his mother's love and support would be a steady anchor to face the obstacles ahead. Aurora, noticing Jake's downcast expression, tried to break the silence with a gentle question. "How was your day, Jake?" Jake hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. The weight of emotions and the sense of failure still haunted him. He knew he needed to share the truth with his mother, but the thought of revealing his loss made him feel even more vulnerable. Finally, Jake gathered the courage and looked at Aurora with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Mom, I have to tell you. I lost my job today." Aurora's face immediately showed surprise and concern. The shock was clear in her expression, and the wrinkles on her forehead deepened as she tried to grasp what was happening. With visible effort, Aurora stood up from the sofa, her legs heavy and aching, and approached Jake with a look of genuine worry. "What happened, my dear?" she asked, her voice full of tenderness and anxiety. Jake felt a lump in his throat as he saw the concern in his mother's eyes. He prepared to explain the details, comforted by the support she always offered. Aurora's presence, even with her difficulty in moving, felt like an unwavering source of love and understanding. As Jake began to recount what had happened, the feeling of being home, close to someone who truly cared, filled his heart. He explained the situation to Aurora, detailing each moment of the day. He described his encounter with Mrs. Eleanor, the difficulty the elderly woman had in paying for the fuel, and how, despite the hostility from his colleagues, he decided to help her. With a trembling voice, Jake shared the conversation he had with the manager and how it ultimately led to his dismissal. Aurora listened intently, her silence showing the deep concern she always had for her son. The bond between them, strong and warm, was a symbol that despite adversity, her love and support would be a solid foundation to help him face the challenges ahead. As Jake spoke, his 10-year-old sister, Lucy, entered the room. She had noticed the sadness in her brother's voice and felt the need to approach, with a look of worry and understanding far beyond her years. Lucy walked up to Jake and hugged him tightly. "Brother," Lucy said with a sweet and firm voice, "you did the right thing. What matters is that you helped someone who needed it. We'll figure this out, I'm sure of it." Lucy's gesture and words brought Jake an unexpected sense of comfort. The wisdom and empathy of his young sister offered a much-needed relief. He hugged her back, feeling the strength and warmth of sibling support. Aurora watched the moment with a bittersweet smile. Lucy's maturity in handling the situation was a reflection of the loving and supportive environment that she and Jake had created at home. The embrace from Lucy and her encouraging words helped to lift some of the gloom hanging over Jake, giving him a new perspective and a renewed sense of hope. As Jake stepped back from the hug, he looked at his sister and mother, feeling a wave of gratitude. The support and understanding of his family made him feel a little stronger, ready to face whatever came next. The certainty that they would be by his side helped him believe that, despite the challenges, there was a path forward, and together they could find a solution. Even though concern was visible on her face, Aurora tried to remain calm while dealing with the situation. Although the family's finances were a constant worry, her support for Jake was unwavering. She knew that, despite their financial hardships, the integrity and kindness of her son were values she had instilled in him with pride. Aurora looked at Jake with a gaze full of understanding and encouragement, recognizing the courage and generosity he had demonstrated. "You've always had a generous heart, Jake," she said with a voice that, despite its softness, carried a deep sense of pride. "I believe that in the end, everything will work out. The kindness you showed today is something rare and precious." Jake felt a surge of gratitude hearing his mother's words. Despite the disappointment of losing his job and the financial pressure his family faced, he felt strengthened by the unconditional support of Aurora and the understanding of Lucy. If there was any reason to feel proud, it was the fact that his actions had been guided by deep compassion. Even after hearing the news of his dismissal, Jake had no regrets about his choice. He had acted according to his principles, helping someone in need without expecting anything in return. For him, the importance of doing good for those who need it, regardless of personal consequences, was a value that outweighed any obstacle or difficulty. Aurora, seeing the determination and dignity in her son, felt they would emerge from this situation stronger. She believed that, in the end, the good Jake had done would come back to him in some way, and that his actions, though not recognized by the company, demonstrated the kind of character that truly mattered. Despite the tension and uncertainty, their home had become a place of support and hope. Aurora and Lucy stood by Jake, offering the comfort and strength he needed to face the days ahead. Together, as a united family, they were ready to confront adversity and find a way to move forward, keeping faith that at some point, things would change for the better. While Aurora and Lucy sat together in the living room, discussing how they might handle the situation, the phone rang, breaking the tense silence that hung in the air. The sound of the ringing was a reminder of the real world, which had seemed distant at that moment. Jake, still deep in thought about the future, got up to answer the call. He picked up the phone, noticing an unknown number on the screen. With a mix of curiosity and mild anticipation, he answered. Hello? Jake said, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. On the other end, a calm and friendly voice responded. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm Mrs. Eleanor's grandson, the woman you helped at the gas station today. Jake was surprised to hear Mrs. Theo, Eleanor's name, and immediately became more attentive. Ah, yes, of course. Hello, Ethan. How can I help you? Ethan continued, his tone warm and visibly grateful. I wanted to thank you for helping my grandmother. She told me what happened, and I'm deeply touched by your generosity. She told me how kind you were. Jake, feeling a mixture of relief and curiosity, responded, It was my pleasure to help. She seemed to need assistance, and I just did what I thought was right. With the same warm and sincere tone, Ethan explained, My grandmother was really moved by your kindness. When she got home, she told the whole story, and I wanted to contact you immediately. I also found out that you were fired because of it, and I'm truly sorry for that. Jake, touched by Ethan's concern and empathy, replied firmly, Don't worry, Ethan. I don't regret what I did. Helping your grandmother was the right thing to do. Ethan paused for a moment before continuing. I understand, and that's why I'm calling. I'd like to reimburse you for the fuel, of course, but I also have another proposal for you. Can we set up a meeting to discuss it? Surprised by the offer and the kindness of the gesture, Jake hesitated for a moment. He looked at Aurora and Lucy, who were watching with curiosity and hope. Of course, Ethan, we can meet, Jake said, his voice filled with a mix of anticipation and gratitude. Sure, Ethan, I'm available to talk, Ethan continued, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. My grandmother is really grateful for what you did, and we want to keep our word. Jake felt warmth in his heart as he listened to Ethan's words. The sincerity in his voice and the intention to repay the money for the fuel were gestures of respect and recognition that Jake deeply appreciated. I'm touched by your attitude, Ethan. It would be a pleasure to meet you. You can come by whenever it's convenient. Ethan thanked Jake and confirmed the details of the visit. I appreciate your understanding, Jake. I'll be there as soon as possible. See you soon. Jake, still holding the phone, felt a slight smile form on his face. The unexpected call had brought a new wave of hope and curiosity about what might happen next. After hanging up, Jake turned to Aurora and Lucy, both of whom were attentive and hopeful. He shared the news about the call with renewed enthusiasm. Aurora and Lucy listened carefully, their faces lighting up at the prospect that a solution might be within reach. The idea that Jake's generosity might be recognized and rewarded began to take shape, offering a new outlook on the future. Aurora embraced Jake, and the atmosphere in the room was filled with a positive energy. The visit from Ethan and the promise of repayment brought a sense that, despite the adversities they had faced, Jake's kindness and integrity were being recognized and appreciated. The family eagerly prepared to receive Ethan, curious to see what the future held, and grateful for the unexpected support that continued to arrive. Shortly afterward, Ethan arrived at Jake's house, bringing with him the money to repay Mrs. Eleanor's fuel and a card with a message of gratitude. Ethan handed the money to Jake with a genuine smile, and Jake, visibly touched by the kindness, accepted it gratefully. Beyond the repayment, Jake extended a further gesture of hospitality, inviting Ethan to join them for a coffee. As he entered the house, Ethan was warmly greeted by Aurora, who led him to the living room. While the two settled into the room, Aurora prepared coffee and offered some simple treats. The conversation started casually, with Ethan praising Jake's actions and expressing his admiration for his kindness. Jake, in turn, asked about Ethan's family and Mrs. Eleanor, showing genuine interest in the visitor's story and experiences. As they talked, Ethan realized how genuinely kind and generous Jake was. The cozy atmosphere of the room, with its warm colors and the aroma of fresh coffee, seemed to reflect the welcoming nature of Jake and his family. Ethan saw that, beyond his generous action, Jake was a person with a big heart and a friendly spirit. What began as a simple coffee turned into an engaging conversation, with both of them sharing stories and experiences. Ethan felt a connection with Jake and appreciated the opportunity to get to know the person behind the kind gesture. What started as a simple repayment had turned into the beginning of a true friendship. As the conversation continued, Ethan watched Jake with admiration. It seemed like the perfect moment to share something important he had been keeping to himself. After a brief hesitation, Ethan decided to reveal the truth. My grandmother has been struggling with memory problems and was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. Ethan's voice carried a tone of sincerity and respect as he spoke, and he noticed the surprise on Jake's face. Jake was stunned by the revelation, his expression of shock clear in his eyes. He listened closely as Ethan explained in more detail. She's a wonderful person, but the illness has made it hard for her to remember things. I understand that she might have caused some confusion during the situation at the gas station, but even so, she remembered you and was deeply moved by your help. Showing a mix of sadness and gratitude, Ethan continued, I just wanted you to know that, despite the challenges my grandmother is facing, your generosity and patience meant a lot to us. And I feel it's important for you to know that your act of kindness was not only recognized but truly appreciated. Although surprised by the revelation, Jake felt relieved to understand the context behind the situation. The news about Mrs. Eleanor's condition helped explain the difficulties she had faced, and he felt even more touched by the situation, understanding the deeper impact of his actions. I'm really sorry to hear about your grandmother's condition, Jake said with empathy and understanding in his voice. I just did what I thought was right at the time. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Ethan, while speaking with Jake, explained with a tone of concern and sincerity, We're trying to adapt to the new challenges related to my grandmother's health. We can't leave her alone at home anymore, and it's been a challenge for all of us. Just today, she drove off without anyone noticing. He paused, looking into Jake's eyes with an expression of gratitude. What you did was incredibly moving during such a difficult and vulnerable time for our family. Your kindness showed that there are still good people in the world. Even without knowing our circumstances, you did what was right. As Jake listened attentively, he felt a wave of compassion for Ethan's family. Understanding the difficulties they were going through gave him a new perspective on the situation, and he was grateful for having had the chance to help, even without knowing the full story at the time. I almost feel embarrassed, Ethan. It was a simple gesture, done from the heart. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of connection and mutual understanding until Ethan replied, Yes, I understand. Then, finally, Ethan revealed the true reason for his visit. With a resolute tone and a look of respect, he said, Actually, I'm the owner of the gas station where all of this happened, Jake. And because of that, I want to make you an offer as a way to thank you for what you did. I'd like to offer you a job as the station's manager. I'm sorry you were unjustly fired and Mr. Thompson has already been let go. The offer caught Jake completely by surprise. He looked at Ethan, stunned and emotional, absorbing the meaning of his words. The idea of a promotion instead of a dismissal, especially in such a challenging moment, was a significant gesture. It not only recognized Jake's kindness, but also offered him a new opportunity for his future. With his eyes shining with gratitude, Jake responded, I don't know how to thank you enough, Ethan. This means so much to me. I gratefully accept the offer and look forward to contributing to your company in the best way possible. Ethan smiled, visibly relieved and pleased to help someone whose kindness had made all the difference. I'm happy to be able to repay you, Ethan said, as the two shared a moment of mutual respect. What had started as a simple conversation about an act of generosity had turned into a new opportunity for Jake, showing that sometimes, even in the most difficult situations, moments of hope and new possibilities can emerge. Surprised and deeply moved, Jake listened carefully as Ethan continued, his tone both encouraging and firm. I have full confidence in you, Ethan said, looking Jake in the eyes with sincerity. I saw your compassion and dedication during what happened at the station. I believe you'd be perfect for the position. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive a brief training, and your start as manager will be immediate. I'm confident that with your work ethic, compassion, and leadership skills, you will be a valuable addition to our team. Jake felt a surge of emotion as he listened to those words. Ethan's offer was also a reaffirmation that Jake's character and actions had not gone unnoticed. The possibility of starting a new chapter in his life, with a position of responsibility and the chance to make a meaningful contribution, brought a sense of renewed hope. With his voice choked with emotion, Jake responded, "Ethan, your words mean so much to me, not just for the offer, but for how you recognize the value of what I did. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity and ready to give it my all." Ethan smiled, visibly pleased with Jake's response. "I'm excited to work with you, Jake. I believe you'll bring a new perspective and great value to our team. Let's start planning your training and the next steps." Jake, feeling a mixture of relief and excitement, thanked him once again. Ethan's visit had turned a difficult situation into an opportunity for growth and renewal. With a new job in sight and recognition of his effort and kindness, Jake felt invigorated and ready to face the challenges ahead. The chance to start fresh and be part of something bigger brought a new light to his future, reaffirming his belief that even in moments of adversity, kindness and integrity can open unexpected doors and create new opportunities. With tears of gratitude in his eyes, Jake thanked Ethan once more for the offer. The act of kindness that began at the gas station had turned into an extraordinary opportunity for Jake and his family. What seemed like a simple gesture of generosity was now creating a new and promising path in his life. The next morning, Jake received his training and began his new position with renewed determination, bringing to the role his leadership skills, work ethic, and above all, the same compassion that had guided him when he helped Mrs. Eleanor. In the first few months of work, Jake quickly stood out. His dedication and management skills were evident, and he was recognized for his ability to lead the team with empathy and effectiveness. His contribution helped improve the station's operations, increasing customer satisfaction and strengthening the team. Jake's hard work and commitment didn't go unnoticed, and he was praised by both his colleagues and supervisors. Even Paul and Mark, who had once mocked his kindness toward Mrs. Eleanor, completely changed their attitudes, fearing they might lose their jobs. Additionally, the impact of Jake's new position was profound for him and his family, truly changing their lives. The financial stability that the new job brought eased the economic worries that had been a constant source of stress. Aurora and Lucy felt a wave of relief and happiness as they watched the positive transformation in Jake's life. With the new job, Jake was finally able to provide a better life for his mother and sister. The financial stability now allowed him to cover all the household expenses, offering more comfort to his family and improving everyone's quality of life. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment and pride for following his heart and doing what he thought was right, even when it had put his own job at risk. Now established in his new role as manager, Jake continued to be an example of integrity and compassion. His journey not only brought positive changes to his own life, but also inspired those around him to recognize the value of helping others and believing in human kindness. Gustavo's gesture not only rewarded Jake's generosity, but also reinforced his faith in humanity. The unexpected job offer showed Jake that, despite the difficulties and injustices he had faced, the universe still had ways of returning the good he had sown. This recognition was proof that his actions had meaning and impact, bringing immense comfort to Jake. Over time, he continued to stand out, leading his team with empathy and always striving to create a positive and welcoming environment. Customers at the station noticed the difference, often praising the attentive service and efficiency. Jake's experience demonstrated that acts of kindness, even the simplest ones, can create unexpected connections and transform lives for the better. What started as helping an elderly woman in need turned into a lasting relationship and a new opportunity in life. Jake and Gustavo's story spread, inspiring others to act with generosity and showing that, in the midst of adversity, kindness can open doors and create meaningful opportunities. Jake's life had been transformed, and he continued to touch lives with his story. His example showed that even in the face of difficulties, integrity and a generous heart can create opportunities and build a legacy of hope and inspiration. The cycle of kindness that began with a simple gesture at the gas station had expanded, proving that, in the end, the good we do for others really can come back to us in surprising and enriching ways. So did you enjoy the story? The Narrated Experiences channel thanks you for your company. Don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. telling us what you thought of the story. See you next time.